In 1978, a mafia crew pulled off the biggest cash heist in American history at the time. The mastermind who orchestrated this operation was named Jimmy Burke, one of the most notorious and powerful figures in the mob. They called him Jimmy the Gent, even though he was incredibly bloodthirsty and violent. We'll uncover the secret behind this contradiction as the story unfolds. Jimmy put together a crew to execute a massive heist at a New York airport. The operation was far from easy, and they faced plenty of challenges along the way. But their plan was airtight, and the massive loot they walked away with exceeded all their expectations. The crazy part, though, is that the events following the heist were even wilder than the robbery itself. This is one of the most intense mafia stories, packed with action and plot twists you will never see coming. So, sit back, tune in, and enjoy. I put together this episode, which I believe is one of the strongest stories on the channel, and I'm absolutely sure you're going to love it. Alright, let's get into the story. The Goodfellas connection. There's a famous movie called Goodfellas *. I'm sure many of you know it. The film revolves around well-known figures from the American Mafia, and most of the characters are based on real people. Today, we're going to talk about the exact same characters featured in the movie, specifically these three men. 1. Jimmy Burke. We'll call him the Mastermind because he led the heist. 2. Tommy DeSimone. We'll call him the Madman because he was genuinely psychotic and a ruthless killer. 3. Henry Hill. We'll call him the Hustler because he worked the hardest to build himself up from absolutely nothing. Keep these nicknames in mind so we can easily distinguish them, as there are many characters in this story. The movie Goodfellas which made these figures famous, never actually dove into the details of the specific heist we're covering today. They didn't show how it was planned or executed. They just glossed over it as part of the background, even though it was a monumental event. The reason is that the movie focused more on the characters' lives and the drama between them. In the first part of our story, we'll talk a bit about their lives because they were incredibly thrilling. I mean, a mobster's life is naturally action-packed. But unlike the movie, our main focus will be the heist itself. We're going deep into the details. I've put together a great mix for you, presenting this story in a brand new light. By the way, even though these three were close friends, only 2 of them actually participated in the heist: Jimmy, the Mastermind, and Tommy, the Madman. Henry, the Hustler, wasn't part of it, and we'll find out why later. But regardless, he played a crucial role in their lives, so we have to start our story with him. Henry, the Hustler's rise. From a young age, ever since he was 13, Henry started blending into mafia circles, even though neither his father nor his family had any direct ties to the mob. In the beginning, he did small errands, running to the store, fetching groceries, or parking their fancy Cadillacs. Essentially, he was like a little servant working for a meager wage, but he loved it. He loved being close to the mobsters and being part of their world. In his eyes, they were living the dream. Everyone respected and feared them. They had money and wealth, and they lived a life of luxury. His ultimate ambition was to become just like them. They were his idols. He didn't mind doing grunt work because he knew that in the mafia world you have to climb the ladder. Slowly but surely, the tasks get bigger, and eventually, you become a real mobster. So, Henry constantly skipped school behind his parents' backs, spending his entire day with the mob. He saw this as his true future. The person Henry admired most was their boss, Paul Vario. Paul Vario was the boss of the East New York neighborhood and one of the most prominent mafia capos. Everyone respected and feared him. He was the most powerful man in the area. All the low-level gangsters worked under him and paid him tribute like protection money. That's why they call the mafia organized crime. You have low-level street guys. Above them are the capos, captains. Above them is the underboss, and at the very top is the boss of the family. In New York, there were 5 famous mafia families: Bonanno, Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese. These 5 families, all of Italian descent, completely dominated organized crime in New York. They have a long, bloody history that we won't dive too deeply into, but they had their share of internal wars and alliances. Paul Vario held the rank of capo captain in the Lucchese crime family. The rank of capo is the 3rd highest in the family, right below the underboss and the boss. Young Henry looked up to Paul Vario as his ultimate role model and wanted to be a big shot in the mob just like him. He kept rubbing shoulders with the mobsters until he started getting bigger assignments. They sent him on training missions and eventually had him commit violent or destructive acts, as that was a core part of the business. Over time, Henry started getting the things he always dreamed of: status and wealth. People began to respect and fear him despite his young age. If he walked into a bakery, he didn't wait in line. The owner would serve him personally. When his mother walked back from the market, people would literally carry her groceries all the way home out of respect for her and him. On top of that, even though he was only 13 or 14, Henry was making more money than his father and all the adults around him. Life was booming. Jimmy, the legend and the gent. Around that time, Henry met a very famous figure among the mobsters, Jimmy Burke ***. This is Jimmy the Mastermind who we mentioned at the start. Jimmy held a massive amount of prestige in the underworld. However, he didn't hold an official rank, nor was he a made man, an official inducted member in the Lucchese family, even though his status rivaled that of a capo. So why wasn't Jimmy a made man? Simply because his blood wasn't 100% Italian. This was a strict, non-negotiable rule to get made in a family. Both your parents had to be of Italian descent. Because of this rule, the actual number of official made members in a family was relatively small, maybe around 100 to 150 guys. The associates and soldiers working under the family could number in the thousands. There's a huge difference between being a mafia associate, just a soldier, and an official, initiated member of the family. But Jimmy Burke was a special case. Even though he could only ever be an associate due to his bloodline, his power was parallel to a captain's. He could lead crews and orchestrate massive operations within the Lucchese family. Jimmy was considered an absolute legend. He demanded total respect because he was one of the strongest, most ruthless guys on the street. He showed no mercy. If he put a target on your head, it was getting done. No matter what, anyone who stood in his way got eliminated. Yet despite this violent reputation, they called him Jimmy the Gent. Why the contradiction? Simply because he handed out cash to everyone. The doorman who opened the door for him, $50 tip. The bartender who poured his drink, $50 tip. A random stranger who ran an errand for him, $50 tip. He sprinkled money everywhere, earning him the nickname the Gent. But on the flip side, he was a cold-blooded killer. He had been carrying out hits for mafia bosses since he was 16 years old. Over the years, he earned their respect and became a seasoned pro in every mafia activity. Assassinations, murder, extortion, kidnapping, you name it, he did it. Full package. But the thing Jimmy enjoyed the most was heists***. He loved stealing, and this is what will eventually lead us to the massive operation at the center of this story. Most of his robberies back then targeted cargo trucks. He hijacked everything: liquor trucks, cigarette trucks, seafood trucks loaded with lobsters. If a truck carried anything of value, Jimmy stole it. The crazy part, even the truck drivers he hijacked loved him. They would actually tip him off if they were hauling a valuable load. In return, Jimmy took care of them and gave them a cut of the score. Even the cops were in his pocket. He treated them like business partners, handing out fat bribes to keep them looking the other way. Jimmy took Henry under his wing. At the same time, he introduced him to another kid around his age named Tommy. Jimmy told them, "You two are going to work together from now on." Tommy, the madman with two guns. This kid Tommy is Tommy DeSimone, the madman we talked about earlier. We're about to see why he earned that title. These two, Henry and Tommy, grew up together in the mafia under the wing of one of its most powerful enforcers, Jimmy Burke. Three of them became incredibly close friends. The East New York area where their crew operated was home to JFK Airport, one of the largest airports in America. The airport was a goldmine. It saw massive daily traffic, with an enormous amount of cargo and goods passing through. Naturally, it was one of the mob's favorite targets. They usually didn't target the airport directly. Instead, they hijacked the trucks leaving the airport loaded with goods. Paul Vario, the local boss, had guys, relatives, and associates working in almost every department at JFK. These inside men tipped off the mob about all the valuable cargo coming in and out. So, whenever the crew needed cash, they just kept an eye on the airport trucks. As we mentioned, the truck drivers were often in on it. Mobsters like Jimmy the Gent made sure the drivers got their cut. And honestly, if a driver refused to cooperate or tried to play hero, he'd get beaten to a pulp. It was never in their best interest to resist. The bulk of the mafia's loot during that era came from these cargo hijackings, combined with their usual violent rackets, like extorting local businesses for monthly protection taxes. And we aren't talking about clean, innocent business owners here. Most of these guys were running illegal operations themselves, which is why the mob squeezed them. Anyone who missed a payment got beat down until they paid up. Speaking of mafia violence, we have to talk about Tommy the Madman. Let me tell you why he earned that title. In movies and TV shows, Tommy is portrayed as a hothead who could snap and turn incredibly violent without warning. If you looked at him wrong or said the wrong thing, even by accident, he'd flip the switch, beat you down, or just start shooting. By the way, his other nickname was Asterisk, Tommy Two Guns, because he always carried two pieces on him. The stories say that once, during a sit-down, a young kid forgot to bring Tommy his drink. Tommy took it as a massive sign of disrespect. After yelling at the kid, Tommy snapped, pulled his gun, and shot the kid in the leg. As the kid was on the floor cursing and screaming at him in pain, Tommy got even angrier, aimed at his chest, and shot him dead on the spot. That's the cinematic version. But you know what's wild? An actual mobster who is still alive today, who ran with Tommy and was even part of the heist we're going to talk about, said the movies downplayed him. He said the on-screen Tommy was nothing compared to the real guy. In real life, Tommy was way crazier, more violent, and far more psychopathic than Hollywood portrayed. One of the most infamous stories about Tommy involves a made man named William Billy Batts, Bentvina ***. William had just finished serving a 6-year prison sentence, and the crew threw him a welcome home party. William was a fully initiated, made member of the Gambino crime family, one of the 5 families. Let me remind you, made men are the untouchables of the mafia. You can't become one unless you have pure Italian blood and a proven track record as an earner and a killer. William and Tommy went way back. When Tommy was just a kid starting out, he used to shine the shoes of older mobsters, just like Henry starting out as a servant before moving up the ranks. When William saw Tommy at the party, he yelled out in front of everyone, "Hey, how are you doing, my favorite shoeshine boy? Why don't you go get your shine box and make my shoes look nice?" Tommy lost his mind. He took it as a massive public insult. They got into a screaming match, cursing each other out. Henry managed to calm Tommy down and stop things from escalating right then and there. But Tommy leaned over and whispered in Henry's ear, "I'm gonna kill that bastard." Now, killing a made man from another family is the ultimate taboo in the mafia. No matter what your beef is, you absolutely do not lay hands on a made guy, especially if you are just an associate like Tommy. A made guy hitting another made guy is one thing, but an associate touching a made man is a death sentence. It breaks all the rules of the 5 families. But Tommy was a madman. 2 weeks later, he ambushed William and beat him savagely. His buddies, Jimmy and Henry, helped him. The movie makes it look like Jimmy and Henry planned it with Tommy, but according to real-world accounts, Jimmy and Henry were actually caught off guard when Tommy suddenly attacked William. Since they were there, they had no choice but to back their friend. This makes more sense, because Jimmy and Henry were smart enough to know that touching a made man was strictly forbidden. But once the attack started, they had to finish the job. They couldn't leave him alive. They beat him until they thought he was dead, wrapped his body in tablecloths, and tossed him in the trunk of Henry's car to bury him out in the middle of nowhere. While driving, they heard a thumping sound coming from the trunk. They pulled over, popped the trunk, and realized the guy was still alive, gasping for air. Tommy pulled out a knife and stabbed him repeatedly until he was completely dead. Then, they dug a hole in a secluded area with a shovel they had in the car, dumped the body, and left. All these details are 100% real, confessed by the guys who were actually there, which we'll touch on at the end of the story. So now you have a good grasp of who these 3 guys were: Jimmy, Tommy, and Henry. Let's get into the big scores. The 1967 Air France Heist asterisk. The first major score they pulled off was in 1967. This time, the heist was actually asterisk inside the airport, not just hijacking a truck leaving it. The tip came from an inside guy named Robert McMahon ***. Robert sat down with Henry and Jimmy and told them there was a massive payload sitting in the Air France cargo terminal. He told them huge amounts of untraceable cash were being flown into the airport. American tourists visiting France would exchange their dollars for French francs. This was long before the euro. Millions of these exchanged American dollars were shipped back to the U.S. via Air France, landing at JFK to be stored in a vault before being transferred to banks. Robert told them there were hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting there. The best part, the cash was completely untraceable. It was random street money from tourists, not sequential bills from a Federal Reserve Bank. Robert knew this because he worked at the Air France cargo terminal. He knew the money was stored in a highly restricted room. The only guy with the key to that room was the night watchman. The routine was simple. The cash would arrive on a night flight, the watchman would unlock the room, and the money would sit there until morning. At dawn, armored Brinks trucks with armed guards would arrive to take it to the bank. The mob wasn't crazy enough to hit an armored truck full of armed guards. The smartest play was to breach the secure room at night before the armored trucks arrived. To do that, they needed the night watchman's key. At first, they thought about just walking in with guns, putting a gun to his head and taking the key. But the problem was they didn't know exactly when the money would be in the room. If they held up the guard and the room was empty, the gig was up. The airline would tighten security, and they'd never get a second chance. Plan B, steal the key without him knowing, make a copy and put it back. But the watchman kept the key on him at all times. Robert, the inside man, knew the watchman had one major weakness: women. They decided to use a prostitute to honey trap him. Long story short, Robert invited the watchman to a motel. While the watchman was distracted by the woman, Robert slipped the key out of his pants, rushed out, made a duplicate, and slipped the original back into his pocket before the guy even noticed. With the key in hand, they just had to wait. Robert gave them the green light. Friday, April 7, 1967. A massive shipment of cash was coming in. Henry and Tommy headed to the airport and walked right into the Air France terminal. According to Robert, it was normal for people to wander into the terminal looking for lost luggage. He also told them the perfect time to strike was 11:30 p.m. because the guard took his lunch break then. They posed as passengers looking for lost bags. The guard was on break. They walked right up to the secure room, used the duplicate key, and walked in. No alarms, no guards, no resistance. Inside, they found piles of cash stuffed in bags. They had brought a large duffel bag with them, stuffed all the cash inside, and simply walked out. They didn't have to pull a single gun or use an ounce of violence. It was probably the easiest score of their lives. The loot was around *500. If you adjust that for inflation today, that's about *4, a massive payday for a quick walk in and out. Of course, before Jimmy, Henry, Tommy, and Robert could split the money, they had to pay the mafia tax. They handed 20% of the cut straight to the local boss, Paul Vario. Paul didn't plan it, didn't execute it, and didn't lift a finger. But because he allowed them to operate in his territory, he got his cut. That's how the mob works. The intervening years. Over 10 years passed, and a lot happened. Jimmy, Henry, and even boss Paul Vario ended up spending some time in prison. A witness testified against them in a case, and they couldn't bribe their way out of it. But even their time in the joint was a luxury. They had whatever they wanted smuggled in and lived like kings until they got out and resumed their lives. During this decade, Henry got married, had 2 daughters, and built a family. He also dove deep into the cocaine trade. The drug business became his main source of income, making him incredibly wealthy. He was the biggest drug trafficker in their circle. However, boss Paul Vario strictly forbade his crew from dealing drugs. Not because he was an honorable guy, but because he knew drugs brought federal heat. Many top mob bosses had been taken down by the feds because of narcotics, so he banned it. Henry ran his massive drug empire completely behind the boss's back. Paul had no idea. Only Henry's closest friends, including Jimmy and Tommy, knew about it. Keep this detail in mind. Henry was now completely obsessed and distracted by his drug empire. This plays a massive role at the end of the story. The build-up to the 1978 Lufthansa Heist *. We now arrive at *1978 *, the year of the ultimate score, the operation that would become the largest cash robbery on American soil at the time. Bigger heists happened in later decades, but back then, this was the undisputed heavyweight champion. Just like the 1967 job, this was going down at JFK Airport. But this time, it wasn't the French, it was the Germans. Germany has a massive, world-renowned airline called Lufthansa *. You've probably heard of it. It's one of the biggest in Europe. Because of its size, Lufthansa had a massive cargo terminal at JFK, processing a staggering amount of freight daily. Enter a man named Peter Grunwald *, a cargo worker at the Lufthansa terminal. Every day, Peter watched fortunes roll through the warehouse. Some of these shipments were incredibly valuable. Peter started wondering, could this place be robbed? He spent months observing the flow of cargo and the management of the facility. In fact, he spent from *1976 to 1978 *, 2 full years, studying the terminal like a scientist. He tracked when the high-value shipments arrived, how they were handled, and most importantly, he looked for security flaws. After 2 years of meticulous surveillance, Peter concluded that the absolute best time to rob the terminal was in December *. December meant the holidays, Christmas, and the end of the year, the peak season for moving money and jewels. European banks used Lufthansa to ship millions of American dollars exchanged by tourists back to the U.S. They also shipped massive quantities of gold and jewelry. All of this wealth would land at the JFK terminal, where it was supposed to be quickly transferred to armored cars and rushed to the banks. Another massive advantage: the location of the Lufthansa cargo terminal was perfect. If you look at a map of JFK, the terminal was located in Building 261, sitting on the very edge of the airport's perimeter. It was isolated in a corner, making it an ideal target for a quick getaway. The building itself was huge, 3 stories high. The first 2 floors were used for cargo storage, while the 3rd floor housed the administrative offices and the employee cafeteria. The most important room in the entire building was referred to literally as the strong room, or the high-value vault. Every piece of high-value cargo, cash, gold, diamonds, was locked in this room until the armored trucks arrived. Naturally, this room had bank-level security. The strong room was actually a room within a room. To get to the loot, you had to get past the outer door first. This outer door had a double lock system. You had to insert 2 keys and turn them at the exact same time *. If you turned one without the other, a silent alarm would instantly trip, alerting the Port Authority police without the intruder ever knowing. Once you successfully opened the outer door, you had to step inside and close it behind you before you could even touch the inner door. The inner door also required a synchronized double-key turn. Only then were you inside the actual vault with the millions. The keys to this fortress were held by only one man, the shift supervisor. Peter Grunwald, having studied this impenetrable system for 2 years, realized he was out of his depth. He couldn't rob this place alone. His biggest obstacle was the midnight shift crew. There were usually about 8 workers plus the supervisor. How could one guy subdue 9 men? Impossible. So Peter decided to bring in a partner, his co-worker, Louis Werner. Peter pitched the idea to Louis, explaining he had spent 2 years formulating a master plan. The two sat down and reviewed everything. They had blueprints of the building, knew every exit and entrance, and had the employee schedules and cargo manifests memorized. But even with 2 guys, it wasn't enough. They couldn't take down the night shift by themselves. They needed a crew. The 2 coworkers started arguing over how to proceed. Eventually, Louis Werner went behind Peter's back and took the entire blueprint to the Mafia. Louis was a degenerate gambler, drowning in debt. He owed the mob thousands of dollars he couldn't pay, and they had given him his final warning: pay up or else. Desperate to save his own skin, Louis took Peter's 2-year master plan and handed it to the mob on a silver platter. He figured if he gave them the ultimate score, they'd wipe his debt clean and maybe even throw him a slice of the pie, knowing the mob rewarded informants. Through his gambling connections, Louis's tip made its way straight to the top, to Jimmy Burke. Jimmy took charge. As we said earlier, even though Jimmy was just an associate, he had the juice of a capo. He had the power to assemble and command a crew of heavy hitters. Jimmy put together a 10-man hit squad. We won't dive into all their backstories, because each guy is a movie in himself, but we will revisit some of them later, as the aftermath involves some insane plot twists. Obviously, Jimmy was the mastermind and Tommy the Madman was the muscle, but Henry the hustler wasn't on the list. He didn't participate. While it's not entirely confirmed why, it's heavily implied that Henry was too consumed with his booming cocaine empire to risk going on a heist, but keep him in mind, he still plays a part. The setup *. Jimmy sent one of his most trusted guys, Joe Buda to meet with Louis, the inside man. Jimmy needed to know this wasn't a setup, a trap, or a sting operation, and he needed every single detail Louis had. Joe Buda met with Louis and applied the classic mafia pressure. He roughed him up and threatened him, "If this intel is bad, you're a dead man." Louis knew dealing with the mob was a deal with the devil, but his gambling debts left him no choice. Louis spilled everything. He handed over the blueprints, the number of guards, the exact shift schedules, and the entire protocol for the double-lock strong room. He gave them the keys to the kingdom. He didn't even negotiate a specific cut. He just gave it away, praying the mob would be generous. And all of this happened completely behind the back of his buddy Peter, the guy who actually spent 2 years creating the plan. Peter was sitting at home thinking they were still brainstorming, completely unaware that Louis had sold the job to the Mafia. With all the intel verified, Joe Buda reported back to Jimmy. The crew gathered to iron out the logistics. On paper, the plan was clean. They would steal a black van and roll up to the Lufthansa terminal at exactly *3:00 am*. Why 3:00 a.m.? Because that was the designated lunch break for the night shift. Everyone would be up on the 3rd floor in the cafeteria eating. 6 armed men, led by Tommy, would jump out of the van and enter through the front door. 2 guys would stay in the van and drive around to the back loading docks, where the cargo bays were, and wait for a signal. Once inside, the ground team would round up the workers. According to the intel, everyone would be in the cafeteria except the shift supervisor. The supervisor would be in his office. Since he was the guy with the strong room keys, they had to lure him out without raising suspicion so he wouldn't hit the silent alarm. That was the blueprint. Now they just needed Louis, the inside man, to give them the green light when the vault was stuffed with cash. On December 8, 1978 Louis got word that a massive shipment of cash was inbound. Millions of dollars were arriving on a Lufthansa flight, destined straight for the strong room. Usually, when a shipment this big lands, armored trucks are immediately dispatched to haul it to the banks. The money isn't supposed to sit there long. This shipment arrived on a Friday. If the armored trucks didn't pick it up that day, the money would be stuck in the vault all weekend. Louis made his move. He intentionally delayed the paperwork and stalled the customs processing. Because of his sabotage, the armored truck company never got the clearance to pick up the cash. By the time the paperwork was found, the banks had closed at 3:00 p.m. The armored guard said, "We can't take it today, the banks are closed." Louis' sabotage worked perfectly. Millions of dollars were now locked inside the strong room for the entire weekend. This was the golden window. Louis immediately signaled the mob. Jimmy got the call and scrambled the crew. Everything was ready except for one thing, the getaway van. They couldn't use a registered vehicle. They needed to steal a dark-colored van big enough to hold 8 to 10 guys. Finding the right van took them 2 frantic days. Finally, at the very last minute, they stole the perfect black van. It was time to go to work. The execution. December 11, 1978. In the early hours of Monday, December 11, 1978 the crew met 2 hours before the hit to review the plan one last time. Everyone checked their gear: masks, gloves, handcuffs, and loaded guns. It was time to move. 8 guys piled into the black van, with Tommy the Madman taking command of the strike team. Jimmy and the 10th crew member got into a separate crash car. Their job was strictly backup. If the silent alarm was tripped and the Port Authority police showed up, Jimmy's car would literally ram into the cop cars to cause a massive wreck, buying the van enough time to escape. Jimmy parked his crash car at a gas station just down the road from the terminal. At exactly 3:00 a.m., the black van rolled up to the Lufthansa terminal. Just as they planned, the building was isolated, right off the highway, with 0 security gates blocking their path. 6 masked mobsters, heavily armed and led by Tommy, breached the front doors. The ground floor was completely empty. Exactly as the intel stated, the entire crew was upstairs eating lunch. The strike team crept through the dark warehouse, found the stairs, and quietly made their way to the 3rd floor. The workers were sitting in the cafeteria, laughing, chatting, and eating their food, completely oblivious. Suddenly, a squad of masked gunmen kicked the doors open, aiming shotguns and pistols right at their heads. The workers froze in absolute terror. They never expected a heavily armed hit squad to ambush them in the middle of the night. The mob doesn't ask politely. They moved with absolute brutality, throwing the men to the floor and shoving gun barrels in their faces. The workers were paralyzed with fear. And having Tommy, the Madman, running the floor made it 100 times worse. The hostages didn't know it, but they were dealing with a psychopath who would blow their brains out if they twitched the wrong way. One of the mobsters on the crew, a guy named Jerry Valent later testified about exactly how terrifying this moment was for the workers. Tommy took control. According to their intel, there were supposed to be 7 workers on the floor. Tommy demanded everyone hand over their wallets and IDs. He looked down at the terrified men and gave them a chilling ultimatum. "Now we know exactly who you are. We have your names, your IDs, and your home addresses. We know where your families sleep. If any one of you tries to be a hero or does anything we don't like, we aren't just coming for you. We are coming for your families. Follow our orders and nobody gets hurt." By the way, this is a classic mafia psychological tactic. Threatening the family guarantees total compliance. To be continued. The tactic, family first. Now we know exactly who you are. We have your names, your IDs, and your home addresses. We know where your families sleep. If any one of you tries to be a hero or does anything we don't like, we aren't just coming for you. We are coming for your families. Follow our orders and nobody gets hurt. By the way, this is a classic mafia psychological tactic. Threatening the family guarantees total compliance. The Heist, Building 261. Back in 1978, a mafia crew pulled off the biggest cash heist in American history at the time. The mastermind behind this operation was Jimmy Burke, one of the most notorious and powerful figures in the mob. They called him Jimmy the Gent, even though he was incredibly bloodthirsty and violent. We'll uncover the secret behind this contradiction as the story unfolds. Jimmy put together a crew to execute a massive heist at a New York airport. The operation was far from easy, and they faced plenty of challenges. But their plan was airtight, and the massive loot they walked away with exceeded all their expectations. The crazy part, though, is that the events following the heist were even wilder than the robbery itself. This is one of the most intense mafia stories, packed with action and plot twists you'll never see coming. So, sit back and enjoy. The setup, JFK Airport. In a famous movie called Goodfellas, which I'm sure many of you know, the plot revolves around well-known figures from the American Mafia. Most of the characters are based on real people. Today, we're talking about those exact figures. Jimmy Burke, we'll call him the mastermind, the leader. Tommy DeSimone, we'll call him the madman, the psychopath. Henry Hill, we'll call him the hustler, the self-made man. Goodfellas made these guys famous, but it never actually went into the details of the heist we're covering today. It mentioned it in passing, but our focus is the heist itself, the nitty-gritty details presented in a brand new light. The East New York area, where this crew operated, was home to JFK Airport. One of the largest in the U.S., it was a goldmine for the mob. They had inside men in every department, relatives and associates who tipped them off about valuable cargo. The target, Lufthansa. We moved to 1978, the year of the ultimate score. This wasn't a cargo truck hijacking. This was an inside job at the Lufthansa terminal. An inside man named Peter Grunwald had spent 2 years, from 1976 to 1978, studying the terminal like a scientist. He knew the schedules, the security flaws, and the strong room, the vault. He knew that in December, during the holiday rush, millions in untraceable cash and jewelry were shipped from European banks to JFK. The strong room was a fortress. It had a double-lock system. You needed 2 keys turned simultaneously to open the outer door without tripping a silent alarm. Then, you had to close the outer door before you could even touch the inner door, which also had a double lock. The only person with those keys was the shift supervisor. The double cross in the plan. Peter realized he couldn't do it alone. He brought in his co-worker, Louis Werner, a degenerate gambler deep in debt to the mob. Desperate to save his life, Louis betrayed Peter. He took the 2 years of research and handed it to Jimmy Burke on a silver platter. Jimmy assembled a 10-man hit squad. He sent his right-hand man, Joe Buddha, to grill Louis and make sure it wasn't a setup. Louis spilled everything. On December 8, 1978, Louis saw his chance. A massive shipment of cash arrived. He intentionally sabotaged the paperwork, stalling the customs process so the armored trucks couldn't pick up the money before the banks closed for the weekend. The vault was now stuffed with millions, sitting there like a sitting duck. 0 hour, December 11, 1978. At 3:00 a.m., a stolen black van rolled up to the Lufthansa terminal. 6 masked men, led by Tommy the Madman, breached the building. The timing was perfect. The crew was on their lunch break on the 3rd floor. Jimmy Burke and a backup driver waited in a crash car nearby, ready to ram any police vehicles if things went south. Inside the cafeteria, the workers were laughing and eating when the doors kicked open. Heavily armed mobsters threw them to the ground. This is where Tommy delivered his chilling threat about their families. They gathered the IDs to prove they knew where every worker lived. Tommy then grabbed the supervisor and forced him toward the vault. With a shotgun to his head, the supervisor opened the double-locked doors. When the inner vault swung open, the crew saw it, mountains of cash bags. In less than 60 minutes, they loaded nearly $6 million into the van. By 4:30 a.m., they were gone. It was the perfect crime. No silent alarms, no shots fired. But as we'll see, the bloodiest part of the story didn't happen during the heist. It happened when they tried to split the money. The conclusion: the price of blood. Music, slow, dark, and melancholic. So the crew walked away with nearly $6 million. In today's money, that's a staggering $25 million. They were rich beyond their wildest dreams. But as the old saying goes, 3 people can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. Jimmy Burke, the mastermind, became consumed by a deadly combination of greed and paranoia. He didn't want to share the loot, and more importantly, he didn't want any witnesses left for the FBI to flip. One by one, the men who climbed into that black van started turning up dead. Some were found in frozen meat trucks, others in garbage compactors, and some simply vanished off the face of the earth. Even Tommy, the madman, couldn't escape his past. The disappearance of Billy Batts finally caught up to him. In early 1979, Tommy thought he was finally going to be made, the highest honor in the mob. Instead, he walked into a room expecting a ceremony and walked into his own execution. He was killed by the Gambino family as revenge for Batts. His body was never found. And what about Henry, the hustler? The man who watched it all from the sidelines. As the bodies piled up and the FBI closed in, Henry realized his family was a lie. To save his own life, he did the unthinkable. He broke the code of omerta. He became a federal witness, testifying against his lifelong friends and sending Paul Vario and Jimmy Burke to prison for the rest of their lives. Screen goes black or shows a photo of the real Henry Hill. Henry Hill spent the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, living as a nobody in the witness protection program. He once said, "I'm an average nobody. I get to live the rest of my life like a schnook." The greatest heist in American history didn't lead to a life of luxury. It led to a trail of bodies and a lifetime of looking for shadows in the dark. Final sign-off. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the real world of the Goodfellas, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories from the dark side of history. And as we mentioned at the start, don't forget our brothers in Gaza in your prayers and donations during this holy month. The link is in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next mystery. Peace be upon you.